I'm Drew Paul Bell, and today we have a question from our friend Project Ramses, who wants to know if I can make a video about architecture school. And I would say that all of my videos are about architecture school, but I think what you mean is kind of a broad overview of architecture school in a nutshell for maybe somebody coming in as like a high school student or someone interested in beginning architecture school. And if that's not what you meant, let me know, but I think this would be cool anyway. So I think there's a few things that differentiate architecture school from other majors or high school, right? Probably the other types of schooling that you're used to. So the major staple that separates architecture school from everything else is a class called studio. There's other classes like structures and history where it's typical, like you sit down at a desk and you're listening to a professor, you take notes, you take tests and exams and write essays. But studio is structured completely differently. Instead of sitting in one desk for like an hour and a half, you're at your desk, which is your desk always. At least that's the way it is in the US. I've heard it's different over in Europe, but anyway. You're sitting at your desk and you're working on a project, and you're there for like 4 hours. This is the typical day. And the teacher will like go around and speak to each different student about their projects and kind of where they're at, give them guidance. There's a lot of one-on-one talking with the professor. These are called desk crits. And this is like the typical day in architecture school. You're presenting kind of one-on-one to your professor the stuff that you've done since you last spoke and progressing the design. In studio, instead of taking exams and writing essays, your grade comes from what's called pinups. Pinups are when you take all the work that you've been working on and you pin it up on the wall. There's also, in pinning it up, there's also usually this step where like you make it attractive. So it's not just like raw information, it's also like you have to curate and design your presentation so that your information is clear, easy to read, and good looking when it's up on the wall. So these pinups are really quite different than most other like tests and projects, where you really like you make something and then you pin it up and then you got to stand in front of it and pitch it to jurors, to who would be, by jurors I mean like your teacher or other architects, maybe other teachers, maybe upperclassmen, and also like your fellow classmates. So you're really presenting it to these people, and then it's also called a critique, so then they critique that. This is a little bit different, obviously, than like writing an essay and turning it in where the teacher grades it in private. This is a lot more public. And naturally, you could understand why this might be a little bit more stressful. But you get used to it. But again, I'm just mentioning this because the concept of the critique is very foreign to like many other majors, many other students. Like an English major doesn't really have the critique that an architecture student has. And again, this is just scratching the surface. There's a bunch of videos I could make about like the critique and what it really means and all this stuff, but that's for another time. So we've covered kind of like the studio class, kind of like the day-to-day structure and how grades happen in that class. Next I want to talk a little bit about the overall kind of progression of the major. So this is the way it was for me anyway. I can only speak from my own experience, but the way that the whole degree was structured was in the very first semester. We focused more on like drawing and art. So we learned how to use charcoal drawings and pencils and pens to draw. And that had a slant towards seeing architecture, right? So it was still architectural in the way that we did it, but we weren't drawing floor plans and we weren't designing a building right out of the gate. And I think that's kind of typical. I think that they try to kind of withhold that and try to train you in arts first before just diving right into doing buildings. They kind of have a fear of you being too technical and making just generic bland buildings. They want to make sure you know art first. And again, it's just my experience. So then as the semesters went on, we experimented more with like materials and the stuff that we would do to make models, though still not making models of buildings. We would make like material experiments and calisthenics and stuff like that. So then as the next several semesters went on, we kind of progressed in the intensity or the size and the scope of the projects we were working on. So we would work on like first we did like a wall, and then we did like the side of a building, and then we did like a bench, and then we did a pavilion, and then we did like a medium-sized building, and then we moved on to do like a gallery, then a mid-rise, then a high-rise, then an urban design project. Then for our last semester we did our thesis, which I was in a 5-year program. I've talked about the difference between 4- and 5-year programs in another video of mine. I'm gonna link that up right here. But so the thesis project, just as a quick summary, is more about like, it's kind of just a self-guided project where you decide what design experiment you want to try, and you go out and you kind of, it's really just more self-guided. You can choose whatever you want it to be. So that's kind of how it grows. And then as you're taking studio classes, that's all in studio class, by the way, then you're also taking other classes where you're learning about design communications, like drafting and 3D modeling in the computer. You'll take classes on structures, on environmental design and construction techniques. You'll take architectural history and several other like supporting classes that you also have to balance while taking studio. So yeah, that's kind of like the evolution of architecture school. And oh yeah, of course you're going to be in there probably taking core classes and things like that. So then the one other thing that I want to talk about architecture school and kind of what makes it different than others is what's called studio culture. Studio culture is kind of a buzzword within architectural education. It's kind of like this, it's a name for what happens when all these people in studio who have their own desk and are in there all the time, when they're spending all this time around each other working towards common goals, right? And basically it's really like the time though, they all grow really close to each other. And it kind of creates this environment where people are constantly throwing out ideas and asking each other questions about design, and it really creates a pretty cool environment. It's kind of like when you trap a bunch of people together who are going to all work on the same stuff, and it's like they're going to get bored and keep talking about it, you know? And that's something that I don't think like English majors or business majors really have the infrastructure for, because they'll go onto their college campus and they'll go to like their 2 classes for the day and then leave, and they don't really have that kind of like environment where they spend so much time that they end up like exchanging ideas. Like they don't really have the space to build a culture in, but Architecture Studio does. And so you'll find that you make very, very interesting and very meaningful relationships with people in Architecture Studio, and this can be a lot of fun. And it's I can get super sentimental about this and ramble on forever, but this is something that it's different for each person, and it's definitely different in each school and within each year. So like this is just a total experience that is a lot of fun and awesome, but you got to kind of go experience that on your own. So I hope this helps. Just to recap, there's really a difference in structure between studio. We talked about the difference between studio class and just typical lecture classes, and like the evolution of the major, the types of projects that you work on in studio. And we talked a little bit about studio culture and kind of how that separates, that kind of extra thing that architecture has that other majors don't. So this is, again, kind of a brief overview of architecture school in a nutshell. And if you are about to start architecture school, I hope that this helps give you some context about what to expect. If you have any questions, let me know what those are down in the comment section down below. What I really try to do with these videos is talk about the kind of thing that you're not going to already hear from a professor or in a book. It's the kind of like advice, kind of mentorship type stuff that I think would be helpful, or that is helpful, that you know would be helpful. So let me know what that is. I would love to help you out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this video. And again, I just hope this helps. And I'll talk to you next time.